Hello and welcome to session 5 of Year 5 History with me, Mrs. Furby. It is lovely to see you again. I hope you're well, I hope you're feeling good, and I hope you're feeling ready to go. We're carrying on with the Saxons and the Vikings, and we started looking at the Vikings last lesson, and that's who we're going to be looking at today. We're going to be looking at the Vikings that settled in Britain. So we are still doing the same learning objective. We are looking at continuity and change. So if you didn't do last session, it'd be great to go back and do that one first, as that's going to really help you with this learning objective and this history skill. As always, all you need is a pen and a piece of paper for today's session. So let's get going. Let's recap what happened last session. So last session, we learned that in 789, the Vikings began raiding Britain every spring and summer. Then, in 851, the Viking raiders didn't return home, and instead, they decided to settle in Britain, conquering lands from the Saxons, and they took over in various places. Okay, the Saxons obviously weren't happy about it. They were scared. They weren't sure where the Vikings were going to come from, and it was all a really scary time and lots of unsettled behaviour and lots of fighting and things like that. So, the Vikings. There are lots and lots of famous depictions and famous things of the Vikings that you may well have seen. There are lots and lots of books aimed at children your age about the Vikings, and there's films. So Brave, if you've ever seen Brave, that's sort of based around the Vikings and those sorts of things in the Saxons. How to Train a Dragon is sort of based around the Vikings. And then in the Marvel universe, you've got Thor and Loki, I think. They're sort of based around the Vikings as well. So you may well have seen them, but you will notice that in all of these things, the Vikings are wearing these really cool helmets with horns that come out the side. It's a myth. We have never ever found, archaeologists have never ever found a Viking helmet that had the cool horns, which is really sad. And we're not really sure where this whole horn myth came from. Maybe they did, maybe the horns themselves have decomposed from what they were made of, but we've never actually found it. So that is a bit of a Viking myth. So there's a fact for you right there. And this reminds us that it's easy to forget when you learn history of the Vikings that they were people too. In the books, we often talk about them being ruthless and ruthless warriors and invaders and fighting. But just like in every time period, they lived normal lives as well. So they were also normal people. And it's often easy to forget that. So we're going to look at that today. We're going to look at what Viking life was like. So let's learn a little bit more about the Vikings themselves. The lands the Viking came from were crisscrossed and bordered by water. Okay, so there were lots and lots of streams and rivers that went up them. As a result, they were master shipbuilders. So they used to use the ships to get around all over the place, and they were brilliant at navigating the sea. This helped them get across to places like Britain and all the other places that they raided. They didn't just raid Britain, though. They set sail and struck different parts of Europe. So different parts of Germany, round to France, what we call France now, and even further around. They got as far as Africa. There's evidence that the Vikings got to Asia and North America, which was earlier than we ever thought that happened. So there's evidence that the Vikings got all the way across to North America as well. They didn't just raid. The Vikings, a lot of the time, were fairly peaceful, and they were traders. So they used to go to these different places like in Asia, and they used to trade their things like furs and slaves and amber and things for other luxuries that other places had. So things they couldn't get. So they used to give over the things that they made, the things that they had from their land, and the lands would give them things back. So things like luxuries like silk and all sorts of things that other countries made. So they weren't just ruthless killers who came and took what they wanted. They were mainly farmers and fishermen overall, but they were very efficient warriors. Their armies could cover a lot of land very quickly using horses. They were very good horsemen, and their long ships, which I'll show you my other one. This one I got when I went to Norway a couple of years ago. It's a little one. It's actually a candlelight holder, but you can see the sort of long ship shape. They were very well organised, which is a bit like the Roman armies, which is why they were so good at conquering. Like the earlier Saxons, the Vikings were also pagans, and their religion was based around many warlike gods. You can see in the corner I've put some examples of them. So you might have heard of Odin, you might have heard of Thor and Loki. Loki, again. They're some really famous ones that you might have heard of. The Vikings believed that to get into a special place after death, known as Valhalla, there were lots of different places you could go after death. There's one special one in particular called Valhalla. You had to be a fearless fighter who had fought or died in a great battle, and that's the only way you could get to Valhalla. Important Vikings would be laid to rest in a boat, like the Saxons, but unlike the Saxons, their boat would be set out to sea and would be set on fire. Okay, so the Saxons buried their dead in a boat. The Vikings put their dead in a boat and set them out to sea and then put the boat on fire. What about Viking daily life? The Viking houses were very similar to the Saxons, except they were longer, and they had a via in the middle, so you can find them. So you can see this Saxon house here, it's quite a long house. Their diets were similar, although the Vikings ate a lot more fish than the Saxons because they lived on the coast. They farmed similar crops and they kept similar animals, so cows, goats, horses, sheep, pigs, chickens, very similar things. They did a lot of weaving to make clothes, as they needed them to be thick and tough because it was so cold in the north where they came from. So they did lots and lots of weaving, going in and out rather than sewing. Technically, the term Viking means the men only. Women only travelled to the other countries if there was a plan to settle there. Okay, so the Vikings actually refers to the men from this time period, and women didn't come over and do the raids, only the men did that. But if a Viking had decided that they were going to go there and stay, they might take their women with them. So the rest of them are called the Norse. Okay, so when they weren't sailing away, they were the Norse people. Free Norse women did tend to have more rights and more power than the Saxon women. Okay, so they were better off. But on the whole, they mostly stayed home and cooked and made clothes. The remains of toys have been found that showed Viking children plays, and they were usually toys that helped them learn a skill, like a spinning top or a toy weapon. You can see the toy sword in the bottom corner. Children had to help and work from a young age, and they were considered adults once they were married, which was around the age of 16. So you got married and had your own family from the age of 16. But if you think that life expectancy, so people sort of died around the age of 50, it's very different today. So childhood didn't last as long as it does in our world today. Only the eldest son could inherit the family land. So any other sons that a Viking family or a Norse family had, they had to go elsewhere and find their own land. How do we know that the Vikings were ruthless invaders and settlers? How do we know this? Well, when we learned last time, I told you about Ethelbert, and Ethelbert, who was the Saxon king, really thought education was important. And after he came to power, he got his monks and other people to start recording everything that happened. And they recorded something called the Anglo-Saxon Chronicle. And the Anglo-Saxon Chronicle is a sort of big document, a big book outlining everything that happened in that time, so we know what was going on. And it's being sort of written and rewritten, and we can read it today. So some of the language is slightly different to what you'd be used to, but it told you what was going on. So we're going to look at this bit down here, so where it says the year was 793. So the year was 793 AD. This is an account of how the Vikings plundered and laid waste to the monastery in the land of Lindisfarne, which is quite a famous one off the north coast of England. It's written down the Anglo-Saxon Chronicle, which is one of the most important sources. Now, we call things from time periods sources. So there's a source of information. So it could be a physical source, like an artifact, or it could be a written source, like the Chronicle. Okay. One of the most important sources about the history of England during the Viking period. The core of the Chronicle was written down in Wessex at the end of the 800s. The writing of it continued in other locations in England in the following centuries. So it's hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of years of what happened. And it said that in this year came dreadful forewarnings over the land of Northumbria. So we saw that that's the very north of England. Terrifying the people most woefully, so making them very, very scared. These were immense sheets of lightning and whirlwinds, and fiery dragons were seen flying through the sky. I don't think they were actually fiery dragons. It might have been cannons, possibly, or things like that. But dragons, a great famine, so there wasn't enough food. Then soon followed these signs, and not long after, in the same year, on the 6th day before the Ides of January, so the 6 days before January, the harrying inroads of heathen men destroyed the church of God in Lindisfarne by robbery and slaughter. So it's all very dramatic. Basically, it tells you that these men came from the sea and they attacked Lindisfarne and they slaughtered lots of people. So in the Anglo-Saxon Chronicle, it includes lots of descriptions of the Vikings and their activities in England. But they tell us what the Anglo-Saxons saw of the Vikings, these ruthless invaders that came to their land. It doesn't tell us the Viking side of the story. So it's like when something happens at school and you're being told about it, you hear two different sides of the same story, and one person believes it happened this way and another person believes it happens this way. And teachers will have to listen to both sides and try and work out what actually went on. And it's a bit like that. So this Anglo-Saxon Chronicle is the Anglo-Saxon side of the story. If we were to have a Viking Chronicle or a Norse Chronicle, I suspect it would be very different in how it was said. And we need to remember that when we're learning about history, because the history we have is only ever one side of the story. And we need to make sure that we look around it to see what the truth was. So why did the Vikings settle, fact or fiction? I want you to decide as we go through. I want you to pause the screen, read them out loud and see if you can decide whether you thought this was true or false. All of the things on there I've either said so far, so you should be able to work it out. You can always go back and watch the video again if you need to. Unpause when you're ready. Okay, so fact. The Vikings chose to settle, so stay in Britain, because it was overcrowding. There wasn't enough land to go around. True, a Viking family and the oldest son could inherit the family farm. This means all the other sons had to find their own land. Their houses and way of life was already very similar, which made the change easier. Britain was an easy target. And once they realised Britain, they realised how good the land was to farm things. False. The Vikings liked the Saxons and wanted to join them. Not true. The Vikings wanted to give up their religion and become Christians. Not true. And the weather was too cold. Also not true. Now, this is Ragnar Lodbrok, one of the most famous Viking raid leaders. You are going to pretend to be one of Ragnar Lodbrok's advisors. You have to try and persuade him that he will become more powerful and wealthy if he settles in Britain and conquers the Saxons and their land. You need to create an advert or a leaflet or write him a letter explaining why he should move to Britain. Use all the things from this lesson so far. You can go back and watch the video as many times as you want, or you can even do your own research on the internet if you want to, or books if you've got some. But think about power, money, land, farming, status and religion. And there's lots in this lesson and last lesson if you want to. And see if you can create a advert or a letter telling Ragnar Lodbrok why he should go to Britain and why he should stay there. Okay, so that's your activity for today. Pause the video, and when you finish your leaflet and finish your letter, unpause it for the end. Okay, I bet your leaflets and letters look amazing. Again, I wish I could see them all right now, but I can't see them all through the screen. So make sure you keep it safe and you take it back into school when you can. You have learned lots and you've done some really deep historical thinking today. You've thought about how often in history there are parts that are left out and you have to look for them. You've learned that what is written is only one idea, one side of a story. So you need to look at both sides. So the Vikings weren't just ruthless killers, they were people too. We've learned about what Viking life was like, their homes, their families, their jobs. We learned about where the Vikings sailed and that they didn't just raid, they also traded. So they didn't just take things, sometimes they traded for other things. We've done some fact and fiction about the reasons why the Vikings settled in Britain. And we've learned that change did not just happen everywhere for everyone at the same time. The Vikings weren't across the whole of Britain. You've used your persuasive skills to show why a change for the Viking leader was a good thing. You've worked really, really hard today. There was lots in there. I hope you enjoyed it. I hope you're enjoying the Vikings and the Saxons as much as I am. I really can't wait to work with you again next lesson. See you soon. Enjoy the rest of your day.